Is this literally the best card in Yu-Gi-Oh right now? What is up guys, TopTierYugioh here, and today I've got an Adventure Branded Despia deck profile for you guys, and so let's go ahead and jump straight into the list. If you do want to refer back to the deck list at any point in time, just check it out on my Instagram at TopTierYugioh so you can literally look at the deck list while I'm explaining all of the cards. I think that's going to be useful for a lot of you guys, so let's go ahead and get into it. First and foremost, we have our Branded Despia engine, and for that we have 3 copies of Albaz, the Jester of Despia, 2 copies of Despian Tragedy, and then 1 copy of Ad Libitum of Despia. And then for the branded spells, we have 3 copies of Branded Opening, 3 copies of Branded in Red, and then finally we have 3 copies of Branded Fusion, which is the best card in the entire deck. Usually when you resolve it, you just win the game because like fusing from the main deck is just broken. I don't know why Konami keeps printing these fusion spell cards that fuse from the main deck, but this deck takes full advantage of it. Because every time you resolve a Branded Fusion, you're using your Fusion Monsters effects as well as your Fusion Materials effects in Graveyard like Despian Tragedy. It's just absolutely insane. This card is ridiculous, and it's the reason why this deck is so powerful. However, it does introduce one of the biggest choke points in the entire deck because there's no way to protect your Branded Fusion from an Ash Blossom. That's something that this deck cannot necessarily play around. You just have to hope to draw hands good enough to play through it. And one card that does help us with that is Branded Lost, because it does help protect the activation of our fusion spells. And so while it doesn't protect from Ash, it does protect like your Branded Reds from cards like Ghost Bell, or it can protect even your Branded Fusions against a card like Baroness or anything else that would negate the activations of it. And so Branded Lost is really good. It also searches you follow-up. It searches you other negations with Mercurier. It's just a good card in general, and I think it's something that just forces your opponent to interact with it. It's kind of like multi-roll, to where once you play it, your opponent has to stop that, or else you just start rolling. And so if you're going against a DPE, for example, like your opponent has to destroy Branded Lost with DPE, because once Fusion resolves, you summon Lubellion. Your opponent can't interact with Lubellion. Lubellion gets you to Mirror Jade. On summon, your opponent still can't do anything. Mirror Jade banishes DPE. And so Branded Lost is really, really big. Something else in this lineup that may not be too standard is the 3 copies of Branded in Red. I wanted to play 3 because it felt like in every single hand, I wanted to draw it because it allows you to play through hand traps like Veiler, Ogre, DPE, and other disruption that could be going on while you're trying to get your own combos in. So I really like Branded in Red. It also means that you don't have to always use Mirror Jade's effect to dump Albion to set it from deck, which means your Mirror Jade is turned on your opponent's turn. And so going first when you draw Branded in Red, it means that you're going to have on your opponent's turn the Mirror Jade, the Chimera, and then a second Mirror Jade. So that's really, really powerful. And then the other thing I like about 3 copies of Branded in Red is that if you already have it in Fusion, then it allows you to search for Branded Lost, and then from there things just snowball out of control. Like if you're searching for Branded Lost because you already have Fusion Red, then you're very likely going to be winning the game, because Lost is just, again, ridiculous. Another arguable choice is the 3 copies of Albaz in an adventure build. However, I really like it because it's still an extra starter card. And even when you draw Albaz with your adventure engine, I'd rather have both of them than none of them. And so I'm perfectly okay with that trade-off. It is a little bit unfortunate at times, but it just means your follow-up is going to be even better. Whether it be following up with a Right on turn 2 or following up with an Albaz summon. Either way, it's something that your opponent has to fear. But this is it for our Branded Despia cards. Moving into our Albaz engine, we have 2 copies of Fallen of Albaz. I only have 1 secret rare copy, and so I kind of want to cut this card to 1. Somebody please stop me in the comment section. Don't let me cut this card to 1. But yeah, 2 copies of Albaz, 1 copy of Albion the Shrouded Dragon. I think Albion's actually really underrated, but it's essentially an upstart goblin from hand that also sets up Tragedy's Graveyard effect. And so that actually comes up sometimes. But also, its ability to just count as a Fallen of Albaz in hand or grave is pretty useful. And so I definitely do like having it in the deck. It doesn't hurt your consistency at all because, again, it's like an upstart. So it doesn't hurt, it only helps being in your deck. And so I do like Albion a lot. 1 copy of Tribrigate Mercurier. I think this card is really interesting because it's a monster negate that you can search off of Branded Lost, but also banishing it from the graveyard can come up as well to trigger that effect. So I think it's an interesting card to have in the deck to get more utility out of your Branded engine, while also still giving you more interruptions on your opponent's turn. So it's a pretty solid card. The only thing I don't like about it is that it does not get your play started. And then finally, we're playing 1 copy of Incredible Ecclesia, the Virtuous, and this card card is indeed incredible. The main reason I decided to include is because during a lot of games, you just need light monsters in deck that you can send off of Branded Fusion, and I wanted to play something that could give this deck more value. And so it really came down to Ecclesia or Fairy Tale Snow. The one thing I didn't like about Snow, however, was that I felt that my graveyard was never filled with enough cards to use Snow multiple times, or at least even one time it would be difficult because it would have cards that I didn't want to banish. And while you can trigger effects of cards like Mercurier, like your Tragedy, there are also cards in your grave that you don't want to banish, such as your Ad-lib, such as some of your fusion spells. And so it was kind of tricky, and I felt that like Snow gives you defense in some matchups. It's also not very good to draw, whereas Ecclesia doesn't necessarily give you defense, but it is good to draw, especially when going second, because it can just get an Albaz to your field. You can use that effect, and then it can be very powerful. Albaz is a good effect. And the other thing is you're constantly sending fusions to the grave, and so you're getting it back turn after turn after turn. And so I felt that with a game with Ecclesia, I might be getting like +2 or +3 even, whereas with Snow, it's not inherently giving you any card advantage. It's only going to, or I guess summoning itself can be card advantage, but I was never getting like +2 card advantage out of it even. But the tempo gain would be sometimes worth it, sometimes not. But with Despia being everywhere, Snow's not really effective in that matchup. You can fuse with face down monsters, it doesn't really do anything. Whereas in the Despia mirror match, summoning an Albaz can be huge because every monster on the board is fair game. And so I kind of like Ecclesia in that regard. I think if Despia wasn't clearly the best deck of the format, I'd be more open to Snow, because like if you're playing against Prank Kids or something, Snow is really, really powerful. But again, in the Despia mirror match, leaning more towards Ecclesia. For the Adventure Engine, I'm playing 3 copies of Water Enchantress, 3 copies of Right, 1 Fateful Adventure, 1 Griffin Rider, and then 1 Dracoback. So when it comes to choosing between the Adventure Engine and a Pure build, I think the Adventure Engine has 2 main advantages over Pure Despia. I think the first and most important is that it has the best ability to protect the Branded Fusion. Once again, Branded Fusion is the best card in the deck, in the main deck at least, and it's absolutely integral to your success. You have to resolve Branded Fusion. And one of the main things that keeps you from resolving Branded Fusion is Ash Blossom, and the Pure Despia build does not have many ways of protecting it. And while they do have plays that they can make without using Branded Fusion, eventually you're gonna use it. And so I think it's best to just try to protect it best you can. I think the Adventure Engine does a great job of that because you have your Griffin Rider. And so it gives you 6 cards plus Foolish Burial, which we'll get to later. So 7 cards that allow you to protect your Branded Fusion. And I think that just puts you really far ahead because, again, once that resolves, you get the ball rolling. Now, I think the other thing about the Adventure Engine that is extremely important right now is actually Dracoback. And Dracoback is one of the few outs to a Despia board because the Despian fusion monsters can all fuse from like Graveyard, they can fuse from Banished Zone, and so you have to get them off of the board somehow, but you do not want to put them in those places. And so bouncing things back to the extra deck is actually really, really important. And so while this deck already excels at going first and second, actually, adding the Adventure Engine makes it even better at going second, because on top of your Despia engine, which again just cracks through boards, slices through boards like a knife through hot butter, the Adventure Engine just sharpens that knife even more. Weird metaphor. I guess it was a simile. But either way, you guys know what I'm talking about. And now, because this is the Fusion deck, we are also playing 2 copies of Fusion Destiny, 1 Dasher, 1 Celestial. I really do like the DPE engine in this deck, and while the Enforcer engine is a little bit weaker this format because of the prevalence of Despia and Mirror Day just handles DPE extremely easily, I do still think that DPE is very valuable against 99% of other decks. So having it in your list only makes your deck stronger, and while there is the potential to break on cards like Dasher and Celestial, those both of these cards also add to your deck as well, because you can special summon out Alubers, which mean you can also activate your Right in the same turn. You can Celestial draw 2, that's always really good. There's just so much value you get from both of these, and drawing them again isn't terrible because you can fuse from like the Graveyard or the Banished Zone. And so there are plays to where you might draw, like let's say Dasher or Celestial, then you activate your Branded Fusion, send the other one, Lubellion, discard the other one, go into your Lulubelle, and then you can like shuffle these back into the deck to summon your DPE, or you can still summon your Mirror Jade, and then later on use Albion or Lulubelle to fuse these away into DPE. After you've used DPE, if let's say your opponent gets rid of it somehow, I don't know, and it's still in graveyard, you can bring it back with Ad-lib. There's just a lot that you can do with there's a lot you can do with DPE in this deck, and so I really like it, and I think it's something that makes this deck much more versatile than it already is. And so wrapping up the main deck, we're going to end with some staples and hand traps, starting with 3 copies of Ash Blossom and then 2 copies of Ghost Spell. I believe that these are the highest impact hand traps right now because Ash Blossom can negate Branded Fusion, Ghost Spell can negate Branded in red. Those are the 2 most high impact cards in the Despia mirror match, as well as most of the format I guess right now, because Despia is literally everywhere. And so I think you have to be playing both of these, at least the Ash Blossom. I've really enjoyed the Ghost Spells too, because it can also be used to negate a right, or not a right, but a Water Enchantress. There's just so many cards that Ghost Spell can negate. And then another card that can negate those same things is Crossout Designator. And so we're playing 2 copies of Designator. I definitely like in this deck because 1, it can negate the power cards of the format, the Branded Fusions, the Reds, the Rights. It can negate all of those cards because they are all also in this deck, while also protecting those cards from Ash Blossom, from Ghost Spells. And so I like Crossout a lot. For a while I was playing 3 copies of it, but I ultimately bumped it down to 2 just to reduce the number of cards in deck and to not see multiples. It isn't something that you need in every single hand, and when you combine it with your adventure engine, you have plenty of ways to protect your plays. And so 2 copies felt perfect. Next we have 1 copy of Foolish Burial. Foolish is really good because it can get you to either of your main engines, whether it be your Despia engine by sending Tragedy, which can search you any Despia monster, or sending Water Enchantress, which can get you the right and the rest of your adventure engine. And so you can go either way. It's just a really powerful card in general at any stage in the game. There are other times where I've dumped Ad-lib just to add it back with Branded in red and then do some plays like that. There's just a lot you can do with Foolish Burial, so easy inclusion here. And then finally, to wrap up the main deck, I'm playing 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity. And so if you look at the construction of this deck, we have 18 extremely powerful 1-card plays. And between the 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity, it makes them extremely consistent and makes it very easy to end up with multiple copies in your hand, as well as allowing you to get to your supplementary cards, such as your Branded in red and Crossout Designators. And so it's very valuable to have a card like Prosperity in this deck. And then because you have so many powerful cards in the deck, it's very rare that you miss on it. And so if you add it in, we really have 21 power cards in this deck. It's absolutely insane. And so this is why I really like Prosperity in this deck. It just adds so much consistency. And while I don't think it's a card that you have to play, it definitely makes the deck a lot better, especially post-side. But that's going to be it for the main deck. Let's go ahead and move into the extra deck. Moving on to the extra deck, we got to start with the 1 Alubra token. If you guys got the structure deck, which tokens are you rocking? Let me know down in the comment section below. I want to know which ones you guys like, but this one is my favorite for sure. It just looks so cool. And Alubra is the boy, so we gotta play his token. But as for the actual extra deck monsters, we have 2 copies of Mirror Jade. Once again, I think it might be the best card of the entire format. It's absolutely incredible what it does to the other decks right now. Like, if you think about what it does against DPE, it just automatically wins that battle because you always can attack over DPE, and then if you're not attacking over it, whenever they activate the effect, you can just chain Mirror Jade's effect to banish the DPE to deal with it permanently. And then if they ever destroy it, it just board wipes them anyways. And so Mirror Jade is just an absurd card. It's disruption, it's follow-up, it's a bomb, it's a board clear. A single monster should not hold all of these roles, but it does. And that is why this deck revolves around it. 2 Albion and 2 Lubellion. Both of these are kind of like your gateway fusion monsters into other fusion monsters. Like, both of these can get you to your Mirror Jade as well as other things. And so they kind of are 2 sides of the same coin. Lubellion allows you to fuse from your banished zone as well as your field and graveyard, and Albion allows you to fuse from your hand as well as your graveyard and field. And so the kind of tricky thing between them is recognizing that Lubellion is the only one that can fuse from the banished zone. It's your only way of getting things back from the banished zone, except for Ad-lib. And then Albion is the only one of these that can fuse from your hand. And so you have to keep that in mind when setting up your plays. Also, Lubellion can attack the turn you use the effect. Albion can attack. Albion has an effect when sent to the grave. Lubellion does not. Next, we have 2 copies of Guardian Chimera. This is another card that is absolutely insane. Like, the ability to destroy your opponent and then draw 2 on their turn is kind of insane. Like, Pot of Greed is banned for a reason. This is a weird Pot of Greed type monster plus a pop, plus when you fuse with an Ad-lib, you're usually getting back a Mirror Jade as well, which is nuts. Guardian Chimera is just insane. You gotta stop Branded in red. Branded in red is like a ridiculous card. And then for our other Branded and Despia fusions, we play 1 copy of Sprend, 1 copy of Masquerade, and then 1 copy of Quiritus. Quiritus is super underrated, but playing it well is like one of the main keys in the mirror match, because if your opponent deals with it, you just get out an Albaz, fuse away their board, and then you've got your board that they have to deal with. So it's really powerful. Sprend, I've kind of been debating between that and a Titanclad. Both of them can summon Albaz in the end phase, which comes up a lot. But also, Sprend can help you play around Contact C if people are playing that. That comes up sometimes. It's also a really easy thing to summon off of a Albaz because it's just 1 monster summon, special summon this turn. So that comes up. Versus Titanclad has to be something with 2500 or more attack. However, with Titanclad, its attack boost can come up and help you OTK your opponents. And so it's kind of tricky. And there's even an OTK, like a full over 8000 OTK, but you have to banish a nib or something of like level 10 or higher from Grave. But it does come up. And so I've kind of been on the fence between both of those. Let me know which one you like better in this deck. And the Masquerade is obviously ridiculous. I would play more than 1, but because we're not playing like the Fright for Patchworks and the Polys, it's a lot more difficult to end on double Masquerade. And you're never going like Masquerade once and then later making another one. So 1 copy is just perfect in this deck. And then the final fusions we play are 1 copy of DPE, which we've mentioned before, and then 1 copy of Predaplant Dragos Stapelia. With that, we play our other Predaplant, our Verte Anaconda, and then to wrap things up, 1 copy of Link Spider. Moving on to the side deck, we have 1 copy of Caught by the Grave, which can be used to protect your Branded fusion, but also it can stop Branded in red, so I do really like this one going second. Going first, it's okay, but definitely not good enough to include in the main deck because of the reduction in hand traps in the average deck right now. But definitely still good enough for the side deck, and there are other matchups where it just comes up as well. 3 copies of Twin Twister for pure Outlich and any other trap decks. 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. 1 Necro World Banshee and Zombie World. We were never losing to Flunder, so you gotta play these. However, one thing I do want to mention is that I might take this out of the deck, because after a while of most Branded Despia players playing this in their side deck, there's going to be so few Flunder players that we will no longer need to actually side deck this card. And so there will be a point to where you don't play this card, and you also just don't play against Flunder unless you get really unlucky. Like, I think that's a gamble that's worth taking, especially if you also have like the Drolls and the Twin Twisters. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as the format changes. 3 copies of D-Barrier, which seems like it might be used in the side deck, but I actually don't side it in the mirror match that often, because I think that this deck on its own, like your engine can beat the mirror match. You just have to outplay your opponent, which is something that I think I'm okay with. I'm not the best player, but you know, I'm okay with that trade-off. But also I do think that like the downside in the mirror is that while it turns off your opponent's plays, it also turns off your own on your opponent's turn, and that can be sometimes a negative. Now it is something that you can hit with crossout, and that can be big, but on its own, I'm not the biggest fan of it in the mirror match. Good, but not quite the difference maker. And then finally, 3 copies of Forbidden Droplets. I think that hand traps are definitely on the decline, but we still need ways to deal with opposing boards, and while this deck's engine can do it relatively well, very well actually, I still want something that I can side in cases to help a little bit extra. And so if you're playing against some of these stronger combo decks, such as Brave, Tenyi, or Based, it would be nice to have something like Droplets in deck. And this is actually one of the main things that I side in the mirror match as well. The other thing that Droplets covers, as well as the Called by the Grave, is if you face a random Scythe deck like PK, Droplets is an answer to it. I do think that, again, with the reduction in hand traps in the average deck, you need some way to combat Scythe decks, because they will make a resurgence at some point in this format. So we got to be ready for that. I'm not about to get Scythe locked, especially not if I can do anything about it. And so we're going to have the Droplets, the Called by, as well as the Bells in the main deck. Those are going to stop that. We also could swap the Twin Twisters for Cosmic Cyclones. That could be a potential move if Scythe decks become, at least the Scythe decks become more popular. That's a substitution that could be made as well. But I think overall this side deck covers most of our bases. And so that is going to be it for this Brave Branded Despia deck profile. I'm definitely thinking about playing this in a regional next weekend, as well as at YCS Hartford. The other deck that I'm considering is Brave Tenyi. I think that deck has one of the highest ceilings in the entire format, and it has the ability to put up inboards that Despia actually can't deal with. And it's one of the few decks that have that ability. And so if you guys want to see a Brave Tenyi deck list, definitely check out the profile that I have on the channel. The link for it will be right here on the screen. the other video will be linking to a Despia combo video once that goes up, so definitely subscribe so that you get notified when I upload it. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.